You keep replaying it, looking for the moment you should have known. And the truth, the part that actually keeps you up, is that you did know. Not clearly, not with proof, but somewhere underneath the excuses you were making for them, you felt it, the small inconsistency, the story that didn't quite line up, the version of them that showed up only when it was convenient. You saw it. You just didn't let yourself believe it meant what it meant. Betrayal never actually arrives out of nowhere. It arrives on time, exactly when the pattern predicted it would, to everyone except the person who spent months quietly explaining the pattern away. That wasn't stupidity. That was something else entirely, and it's about to get a name. You trust too fast. Someone says the right things, shows up at the right moment, and the walls come down before they've actually earned a single brick removed. You explain away red flags. The inconsistency gets a story. The broken promise gets a context. The thing that felt wrong in your gut gets talked back down by the part of you that wants so badly to be wrong about people. And you stay loyal long after loyalty stopped being earned, showing up, defending them, giving them the benefit of a doubt that ran out months ago, because walking away feels like admitting you were wrong from the start. Here's what that's actually been costing you. Not just this one betrayal, painful as it is. It's cost you a pattern you keep repeating. One relationship at a time. Each one dressed up differently enough that it doesn't look like the last one until you're already standing in the wreckage. Every early trust extended without evidence. Every red flag quietly negotiated into a maybe. Every month of loyalty poured into someone who stopped earning it. That adds up into exactly the kind of person betrayal finds easy to reach. You're about to find out why it keeps finding you. And it starts with a warning. Machiavelli gave 500 years before you ever felt this exact disbelief. Here's the forbidden truth nobody around you will say out loud. Betrayal was never random. It was invited, one small tolerated violation at a time, long before the big one ever arrived. Psychologists have a name for the mechanism underneath it, the foot in the door effect, the well-documented pattern where a small request, once granted, quietly resets what feels acceptable to ask for next. It doesn't just work on requests, it works on violations. The first small lie you let slide, and the first broken promise you excused, the first boundary you softened instead of held, none of it registered to you as significant. But to the person doing it, every one of those moments was data. And the data said, keep going, this costs nothing. That's not a character flaw in you. It's a mechanism, cold and mechanical, running in the background of nearly every relationship that ends in betrayal. And once you see it operating instead of just feeling its aftermath, the question changes completely. Not why did they do this to me, but what did I quietly teach them was allowed? You are not the first person this mechanism has ever worked on, and you are certainly not the first to be studied for it. 500 years ago, in chapter 19 of The Prince, Machiavelli laid out exactly why this happens with a clarity most people still can't stomach. In the spirit of Machiavelli, a ruler who appears fickle, easily swayed, or inconsistent invites conspiracy against himself, while one who acts with visible consistency and resolve becomes someone conspiracy simply isn't worth attempting against. He wasn't only writing about kings and courts, he was describing a mechanism that runs exactly the same in a friendship, a partnership, or a family 5 centuries later in your own life. This isn't a modern trend dressed up as ancient wisdom. It's an old, battle-tested warning, and for 500 years, the people who understood it have been betrayed far less often than the people who never learned why consistency is a defense in itself. Let's start with the pattern sitting underneath almost every betrayal you've ever felt. Trust given before it's earned removes any cost to betraying it. If someone receives your full trust before they have done a single thing to demonstrate they deserve it, betraying that trust costs them nothing because they never had to work for what they're about to throw away. You handed it over for free. There was never any real investment on their end to protect. The average mind trusts on potential, on how someone could be, how good they seem, how much promise the connection appears to hold in the first few conversations. Potential is intoxicating, and it's also completely unproven, which is exactly why it makes such an unstable foundation. The disciplined mind trusts on demonstrated pattern instead, not promises, not chemistry. Actual behavior repeated consistently over enough time that a pattern has genuinely had the chance to reveal itself. Imagine handing someone the keys to something that actually matters to you, your finances, your reputation, your deepest plans, within days of meeting them, because the conversation felt easy and the connection felt real. That ease is not evidence. It's a feeling, and feelings can be performed far more easily than character can be demonstrated. The keys you hand out that fast are the ones that get copied, used, and never quite returned the way you expected. Here's the line worth remembering. Trust that costs nothing to earn costs everything to lose. Weak minds hand out trust like it's free because giving it away feels good. Strong minds make trust something that has to be built, brick by demonstrated brick, before anything real is placed inside it. Drop "earn the keys" in the comments if you've ever handed someone access they hadn't actually earned yet. Once you start protecting the keys, you have to protect something even more fragile the very first time someone crosses a line with you, because the first small violation, once tolerated, doesn't just disappear, it becomes the template. Whatever you allow in that first moment quietly becomes the blueprint for every moment after it, whether either of you ever says so out loud. The average mind excuses the first offense to keep the peace. A small lie gets waved off as not a big deal. A broken promise gets reframed as a one-time slip, a bad week, an exception instead of a pattern. Keeping the peace feels kind in the moment, and it costs almost nothing to give. The aware mind treats that first offense completely differently, not as a piece to protect, but as the single most important data point they will ever receive about this person, delivered for free before any real damage has been done. Imagine the small lie the first time it happens, barely worth mentioning. Easy to let go, definitely not worth the conflict of bringing up. You let it slide. Months later, a much larger lie surfaces, one with real consequences this time, and it echoes back to that first small one with an exactness that makes your stomach drop. It wasn't a different pattern, it was the exact same one, tested small the first time to see if it would be allowed, and confirmed the moment you decided it wasn't worth mentioning. Here's the line worth keeping. The first violation is never really the first, it's the test, and your reaction is the result they were waiting for. Weak minds forgive the test because it seems too small to matter. Strong minds treat the test as the entire relationship in miniature. Drop "I see the test now" in the comments if a small thing you once excused turned out to predict something much bigger later. There's a fourth pattern, and it's the quiet one, the one that doesn't look like a mistake because on the surface it just looks like loyalty. Continuing to extend the same closeness after disrespect doesn't preserve the relationship. It teaches the other person clearly and repeatedly that disrespect has no real price attached to it. If access never changes, no matter what happens, then nothing that happens actually matters. The average mind keeps the door fully open, hoping the other person eventually changes on their own, believing that consistency on their end will somehow inspire consistency on the other. So the same closeness stays available after the same disrespect over and over. And the hope quietly does all the work that a real boundary should have been doing instead. The disciplined mind does something colder and more accurate. It adjusts access to match demonstrated behavior every time, without waiting for an apology that may never fully arrive. Imagine a house key handed over months ago when things were different, still sitting in someone's pocket long after the relationship that justified it has quietly changed into something else entirely. Nobody asked for it back. Nobody decided out loud that the access no longer fit what's actually happening. It just stayed because taking it back felt harder than pretending nothing had shifted. Here's the line worth keeping. Access that never gets revoked was never really access. It was surrender wearing loyalty's name. Weak minds keep every door open, hoping the person on the other side eventually earns it retroactively. Strong minds close the doors that stopped being earned exactly when they stopped being earned. Drop "I'm taking the key back" in the comments if you've ever kept someone's access the same long after their behavior no longer justified it. There's a fifth pattern, and it's the one tying every other pattern together because it's the reason none of the others ever had a chance to work. Without a real, felt consequence, there is no actual incentive for the behavior to stop. It doesn't matter how many times you notice the pattern, name the test, or feel the disrespect land if nothing ever costs the other person anything. The behavior has no reason to change, and it never will. The average mind absorbs the cost themselves instead, every single time, because absorbing it feels smaller and safer than the conflict of letting it land where it belongs. They pay the emotional price. They pay the practical price. They stay invested long past the point of return, partly because psychologists have a name for exactly what keeps them there, the sunk cost fallacy, the pull to keep pouring more into something specifically because of how much has already been poured in, rather than what it's actually still worth going forward. The disciplined mind refuses that trade. It makes sure the cost lands exactly where it belongs, on the person who created it, even when that means finally stepping back and letting something break that should have broken a long time ago. Imagine the moment arriving, the one you've quietly protected them from a dozen times before, and this time, you don't absorb it. You let the consequence happen. The relationship shifts, or ends, or gets uncomfortable in a way you've spent months avoiding. And for the first time, the cost lands on the person who actually earned it instead of the one who's been quietly paying it all along. Here's the line that matters most out of everything you've heard tonight. Nothing changes for someone who never feels what it costs. Weak minds keep absorbing the bill to keep the peace. Strong minds let the bill land where it was always supposed to. Drop "let it land" in the comments if you've ever finally stopped absorbing a cost that was never yours to pay. So look at what you've actually been carrying this whole time. The trust extended before it was earned. Keys handed out to people who never had to work for them. Or the first small violation excused to keep a peace that was never really peace at all. The boundary explained into nothing, one reasonable sentence at a time. The access that never got revoked. Closeness offered long after it stopped being earned. And underneath all four, the fifth pattern tying them together. The cost you kept quietly absorbing instead of letting it land where it belonged. 5 patterns, 1 truth. This was never about who you trusted. It was about what you kept tolerating without ever once making it cost anything. That's why betrayal kept finding its way to you, relationship after relationship, wearing a slightly different face each time, so it never quite looked like the pattern it actually was. Not because you're naive, and not because something is wrong with your judgment of people, because judgment was never the missing piece. Enforcement was. And here's what happens the moment that finally changes for good. You stop handing out trust that hasn't been earned. You stop excusing the first small test as if it doesn't predict the rest. You stop explaining your boundaries and start simply holding them. You stop leaving access open for people who've already shown you exactly who they are. Weak minds keep getting betrayed by people who correctly calculated it would cost them nothing. That calculation no longer works on you. You've seen the mechanism now, the way Machiavelli saw it 5 centuries ago, and a person whose consistency has a real felt cost attached to crossing it becomes someone far too dangerous to betray in the first place. So now you know 5 patterns, and if you're honest with yourself, at least one of them probably landed harder than the rest. The trust you handed out too fast, the first violation you excused, the boundary you explained until it disappeared, the access you never revoked, or the cost you kept quietly absorbing instead of letting it land. Comment right now with which pattern you recognized in your own life. Name it. Let it sit there in the comments. not as proof you were naive, but as the first real step toward making sure it never costs you the same way again. If this video finally gave you language for something you felt for years without being able to explain it, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell, because there's more waiting for minds sharp enough to keep seeing the mechanism clearly. You were never too trusting. You were never too kind, too forgiving, too easy to read. You were just never enforcing what trust actually cost, handing it out for free, excusing what should have ended things, explaining what should have simply held. The moment you start making trust something that has to be earned and kept, betrayal stops finding you because it stops being worth the price. You were never too trusting. You were just never enforcing what trust actually cost.